Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the One Thing podcast. We have a very special treat for you all today. We're literally filming this at the midway point of the year. So we thought it very appropriate to bring you what is both mine and Chris's, I won't speak on your behalf, but I know you like this too, but far and away my favorite exercise to do, which is our mid-year check-in. And the reason I like it is because at the beginning of the year, we obviously talk a lot in our world, Chris, about goal setting and about building your plan. And more often than not, people think about this in association with the beginning of the year, right? Like they think about this as something that you do towards the end of the year for the start of the following year. And by the way, yes, you should do that. And yet I find this period of time to be even more beneficial and this exercise to be even more beneficial because often at the beginning of the year, we are very optimistic, we'll say, about what we can achieve, what we can do in a year. And this is the point at which we often have to get real with ourselves and say, okay, am I on track, off track, and what needs to change?
Yeah, well said. I think we sometimes don't take the time we need to hit pause and really zoom out and check in. Like, how are we doing relative to our goals? Like, are we on track? Are we off track? And not just looking at your business, but taking a broader perspective on the whole person and getting some balance or counterbalance in place where we need to and course correct. But I think the important thing is that you take the time to hit pause and do this work because it's so important.
Well, and we talk a lot about regular check-ins, right? We've obviously talked at length on these podcasts and in our trainings about the 411 and utilizing that as an accountability tool. But what most people do with goals, if we're just being honest, we want everybody to do what we recommend that they do. But what most people do, Chris, is they build an amazing plan at the end of the year and prep for the beginning of the year. And then they usually stuff it in a drawer, pull that thing out towards the end of the following year and say, how did we do? And it becomes sort of this game of guess and check of I knew roughly where I wanted to go, but I didn't really track it. And then I looked at the end of the year when I don't have any time or didn't have any time to change or make any adjustments. And I just asked myself what happened and where am I at? And even when people are tracking, what they often track is the activities. And what they don't often do or what they forget to do in their focus around the activities is ask, are those activities still leading me towards the greater goal? Are they still bringing me to where I want to go? And are they still in alignment with what I actually said I wanted to achieve?
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. And also I think there's a lot of value in zooming out even a little bit further because let's say best case scenario, you are looking at your goals and you're doing this on a regular basis. You're kind of narrowly looking at the plan that you've created. And I think it's important to even challenge that and pick your head up a little bit further and say, hey, well, are my goals still accurate? Am I still invested in them in a way that's appropriate? And you don't want to just willy-nilly change your goals. But if your goals aren't serving you or you need to make some changes, it's a great time to do it. So I think in addition to what you said, it's also go up another level and try to validate that you're focused on the right things and your goals are truly representative of what success is for you.
I love that, Chris. So much can happen in the span of 6 months, right? So much life can happen. So much business can happen. So much can happen in the world. And I think that's a really important qualifier too, is the question of, does this still matter? Is this still in alignment with what matters most? Is this actually still where I want to go? Is this actually still what I want to do? Is this still the best place to put my time? Taking into account all the other things that are happening now in my world. I'll give a great personal example. I just personally did my mid-year check-in and I had to giggle a little bit to myself because we're going to talk about this in more depth in a little bit, but I was going through my 7 circles and my seven areas of my life that I want to improve and the big goals that I had in each of those. And one of the big goals that I had was to do the Everest Challenge again this year. And I had that on my calendar to do in August, and then found out in March that I had another little life on the way. That I'm pregnant and have a baby on the way. So therefore, that's not a physical goal that I have anymore. I quite literally will not be able to do that, right? And so, as opposed to beating myself up about it and saying, "Oh, well, I didn't achieve that," well, life's changed, right? Something's happened in the last 6 months that's going to take me away from being able to hit that goal. So the goal is going to change, right? Not to say that I won't still have physical goals, but they do need to change based off what's happening now in my life circumstance.
Great point. Life happens, things change. Congratulations again, by the way.
Thank you.
It's big news. And I think you do want to see, because you're putting goals in place at the beginning of the year to achieve a greater vision for yourself, and that can mean different things, but you hopefully you have a clear picture of where you want to go further in the future, and these yearly goals are a milestone to that place. And so what I think you want to do here is also just take a look at, is it working? Like, are you moving the direction you want to in the broader perspective and the whole picture of your life? Has focusing on your business for the last 6 months, or have you been neglecting other things? Do you need to counterbalance a little bit? Like, can you take a bigger picture of all the areas of your life? And I think that's just an important thing to do. Like, is there evidence that the path you've chosen is serving you in a way that's meaningful?
Yeah, and Chris, I think this is to that point, I think it's so easy as we get into the sort of rhythm of life, I always call it, right? Just the rhythm of the day to day, to put our heads down and focus on what we think matters most, and what we're focused on within usually what's on our 411 is going to show up in the form of our business goals, right? Or our success goals, more often than not, our monetary goals. And it's so easy to get stuck and with our head down focused on that. And if we don't pick our heads up and ask ourselves, are we on track everywhere else? Or really ask ourselves, are we actually incrementally moving forward to where we want to go in this capacity? Well, then we might get to the end of the year and have accomplished significantly in that category and be a little bit upset about all the other things that we left behind in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're saying it's about to be June, which is crazy. We think there's tremendous value in hitting pause, doing a mid-year check-in, and a big piece of that is just doing some powerful reflection to locate where you are relative to the goals that you set, and then also to validate that, hey, am I focused on the right things, and do I need to make any changes to my plan?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really just about having that honest conversation with yourself. And we're going to give some
Mm.
recommendations as we go through this about how to do that. But as always, we highly recommend that you do this in association with a coach or an accountability partner or someone who can help you, and help you to really be authentic and honest. Because it can be hard to do this in a vacuum. It can be really hard to do this completely by yourself. We tend to be a little bit gentler on ourselves. We tend to be easier on ourselves, and this requires a real authentic and clear look at what's happening at this point in time, and a very honest conversation with yourself to ask, am I actually on track or off track, and what needs to change?
Yeah, we say it all the time, and it's so interesting because you can ask yourself a question, even the simplest question, and what you would write down or reflect on in your head, versus if someone else asks you that question and what will come from it. So there is a ton of value, as you said, in having a coach or even accountability partner or somebody else help facilitate this conversation for you so you can get the most depth.
For sure. I mean, the fact of the matter is, Chris, that we're always going to be a little bit easier on ourselves. Well, I'm not where I wanted to be because of X, Y, and Z. Well, this happened and that happened, and by the way, that all might be true. That all very well may be true. But what a coach says is, how can you, even knowing that? How can you, in spite of, or how can you, because of, or how can you still hit this even with knowing that, or having that, or doing that, or whatever? And that opens a conversation to say, how it really, to me, it comes back to how important is this goal really to you? Because life's going to happen either way, right? Life's going to happen, and there's nothing we can do about that. So the question is, can you still hit this while life is happening?
Yeah, and maybe the exception, not the rule, but I've seen it too, that perhaps you're too hard on yourself,
Also,
and
yeah,
there's the gap and the gain, right? You do want to recognize the gap, the things that you need to work on, the distance between where you are and where you want to be, but also the gains that you've made, and taking a moment to acknowledge the growth, because there's a lot of value in identifying what's working too, and sometimes you need somebody else to help you see that.
for sure, for sure. I think when we talk about high achievers, this is obviously also one that comes up consistently, and it is easy to say, "Well, I've been working this hard and I've made no progress." And part of these tools and are really these measurement tools that we have that do allow you to reflect in that. Because when you are someone who tends to err on the side of being really hard on yourself, Chris and I both live in that camp, so we sympathize with you. When you're someone who tends to err on the side of being really hard on yourself, you can work really hard and not give yourself any credit for doing it. You be making a lot of progress, and yet it's not perfect, or it's not where you thought you were going to be, and so you're not going to give yourself any credit for it. So yes, to your point, this is an opportunity to not only reflect honestly and ask yourself, am I where I want to be, but also to celebrate a little bit where you are and what you've done so far, probably irrespective of what's been happening in life.
Yeah, yeah, it for sure. In the spirit of reflection, there's something that I recommend people do, and it's something I do when I'm coaching, teaching, and what we train is we call it the 7 circles. And if you're familiar with the book, it comes straight from the One Thing book. There's 7 circles which represent the kind of 7 big buckets of your life. And I won't go through them all, but I recommend you guys look at that. And about every 6 months, it's good to go through an exercise to just ask questions in each one of these areas. Like, how are you doing? There's different ways to do that. You can give yourself a score, 0 to 10. If you do that every 6 months, then let's say you did it at the beginning of the year, end of last year. Now you've got a baseline that you can measure against and go through that same exercise now in 6 months and say, okay, well, I noticed that I'm up 3 points on business. That's amazing, but I'm down 3 points on health. Now look at your goals. Do they reflect where you need to focus so that you can, if you want to, and you feel like you need to counterbalance health, you can move things around so that you're prioritizing the right things. So it just gives you a really great way to go through and give that broader perspective we talked about earlier about your whole life. Because it's easy when you're head down focused on goals to have things tilt one way and maybe not catch where something's slipping. So it's a simple but I think really powerful way to give perspective.
For sure. And I think this is the importance of always keeping this all in the same place. And we really
Mm,
encourage people to have this like in a folder or in a binder or all in the same notebook so that you can go back and measure where you've been, so that you can have the clarity on where you want to go, and so that you can compare. Like I said, I'll go back to my example. If I looked at my January 1 health goal, like life just looks different for me now. I'm not going to be able to do some of the things that I outlined, and without context, and without building that goal, that new goal, and without focusing on that new thing, well, I might have gone to a space where I beat myself up about it a little bit, and yet life has changed. And so we do have to have that to not only build out our perspective, but also to understand what might need to change for the latter half of the year and how we're going to make progress through that.
yeah, I'm a big fan of just narrowing your focus once you have some reflection. So if you use the 7 circles or you're just broadly looking at big buckets of your life, it's great. Do some reflection. Where are you relative to where you wanted to be at this point in the year, or to your bigger goals, or what ultimate success would look like? And then just ask, like, well, what's one thing I could do to get myself back on track, or what's one thing I could do that if I did it would give me the greatest ROI if I for the remainder of the year. Something like this, just so that you can narrow down to something you can take action on.
So, Chris, I'm going to ask you to coach me on this a little bit, because I think that a lot of people get halfway through the year and this can be you're in one of two spaces. We almost never get anybody in the middle. Like you're either completely tracking it on and you're crushing it, and you're like, yes, I just want to keep this through the rest of the year. Or you're someone who looks up and says, I am nowhere where I thought I was going to be. I'm definitely not on track. I am not halfway to my end of the year goal. What's the process to get back on track? So where do we start? And when we're looking at our overall goals, how do we keep ourselves from getting discouraged if we're that person who's just really off track, really not where we thought we were going to be?
Yeah, well, first we would want to dig in and we'd want to figure out where we are. So locate yourself relative to your goal. So get an idea of, okay, am I off track? Am I a little bit off track? Am I significantly off track? Because it's gonna matter in how you approach it. If you're just a little bit off track, then perhaps it's you can catch up. You can get back ahead, and you can get yourself in a place where your goals are still relevant, and you can work towards them. If you're significantly off track and your goals don't the goal that you're referencing doesn't feel like it's achievable anymore, probably need to start looking at what would success look like for the rest of the year, because you don't want to have goals up there that aren't motivating, especially if you're leading a team and nobody on the team believes that goal is something you can hit anymore. Then you're going to want to reassess and get people back in the saddle, because you'll find disconnect happening across the team. So I think that's important. Just locate where you are relative to your goal first, because that will determine the course that you take to make the changes you need to.
I would also go back to Chris. The we share this quote all the time that people underestimate what they can achieve in 5 years and drastically
Mm,
overestimate what they can achieve in one. And we often work with people with business owners and entrepreneurs who are either in the very early stages of building something out or perhaps just the beginning stages. And what I try to remind people who are in that camp often is that when they do this mid-year assessment, they can sometimes be a little bit hard on themselves or feel like they haven't made the progress they wanted to make. And I would remind everyone that sometimes we're when we don't know what it is that we're doing yet, i.e., we're starting a new business or we're starting in a new market or whatever it might be. Sometimes our goals are a bit arbitrary. Like we can't actually know if this is
mm,
even doable or achievable. So be cautious when you're looking backwards. Like you may have picked something completely out of thin air, and then you started actually building out a plan and working on it. And now you look up and say, oh, maybe I overshot this plan a little bit. So I always say, is the plan the problem or is the problem the problem? And perhaps what you built out or what you expected to achieve maybe just wasn't feasible in a 1 year time frame. You very well may be tracking correctly. You just aren't able to get to the actual outcome yet just yet because you haven't had enough time to get there.
mm. I like what you said. Is the plan the problem or is the problem the problem? Because those are two different pathways, perhaps.
For sure. I mean, we see this in business all the time where someone's like, well, we're off goal. I'm like, well, how'd you come up with the goal? And they're like, well, we made it up. I'm like, well, right. Then are you really off track? Because more often than not, we are making up these goals and we don't necessarily, especially if it's a new endeavor, if it's an established business, we can often work backwards and really quantify how we came up with that number. But if it's a brand new endeavor, well, then you may have chosen something that just quite simply wasn't achievable within this time frame. And the example I always give here is if you've got 100 pounds to lose, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to lose all 100 of those in 6 months. You just picked a goal that was not going to be achievable for you in that time frame, right? Short of chopping off some limbs, right? So if we're not going to go that route, then we have to make sure that we're actually picking something that's achievable within the time frame that we chose to achieve it.
Yeah, I get this question a lot about how big should goals be because it's kind of a funky balance because on one hand you want your goals to be big enough that you're getting out into the space where everyone's going to have to grow and learn and it's still in the realm of possibility for you, but you're going to have to do new things and that's going to push the team and it's motivating and everybody's assuming you have the right people in the right seats is going to be on board for driving. You go just a little bit too far past that and then people they can't connect to it. It just doesn't feel real. And I think that's an important balance to strike. And there's no, I think, clear cut answer. You just kind of have to feel it out and learn, which is why doing a mid year check in allows you to kind of say, okay, maybe we overshot that a little bit. Let's pull it back, or however you need to make the adjustment. In the One Thing book, I think Gary and Jay did a really great job describing these kind of three arcs of goals based on like how big of a question you're asking, how big your goals become. It's doable, stretch, and possible. Like doable, you could do it. Current mindset, wouldn't have to do much, just focus on it. Stretch means you're going to have to like really kind of reallocate and think differently and push some. And possibility is out there, right? You're really going to have to grow to get there. I think there is something to consider. Michael Hyatt did a good job in his book. I think it's Your Best Year Ever, I believe the book. He described kind of a fourth zone, which is the one we kind of referred to before, which is it's too big. And I think that's
Yeah.
important to think about too.
For sure. And I think in this context, especially, it's important when we're really looking at something that's time bound, it's even more important. And I think that the purpose of the possibility goal that Gary and Jay talk about in the book is to ask ourselves, how can I? And if you started
Hmm.
at the beginning of the year with a real possibility goal, well, it's very possible also that you will be off track when you do this mid-year check-in. And yet, after working towards this thing for 6 months, reasonably, you will have far more information when you're asking yourself the how can I question, right? Again, I'll go back to the brand new business example. If you've never done this business before and you have no idea what you're doing, and you sort of picked a goal out of thin air and you started it on January 1, well, by the time you get to June 1, you might have a lot more information to answer the question, how can I? And then you get to decide, are you willing to do that? Right? You and I have talked about this before. I actually just made a social media video about it today, about this idea that often we look at other people's lives and say, well, I want that. And I think often we don't ask ourselves the next question after we say, I want that, which is, am I willing to give up what that person gave up to get that?
Mm.
Right. So I need to ask myself, in the realm of possibility, if I can achieve this, will I? And a lot of times the answer might be yes, but I'd have to let all these other 7 circles of my life fall. And am I willing to do that? And you might say, well, maybe not in the next 6 months, but over the course of the next 2 years, I could stretch out that success and I would be willing to do that. And the 6 month review gives you an opportunity to have that conversation with yourself.
Yeah, I like that. And there's, I think, an honest perspective that you can't be in perfect balance in all of these areas all the time. And so all you're trying to do is just see, hey, did I tilt this too far? Am I okay with where it's tilted? Do I need to tilt it back? So I don't set the expectation that you need to be scoring tens in all areas of your life all the time, because I think you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, it's impossible. Like, and if you are giving yourself tens everywhere, probably lying
Yeah.
to yourself if we're just calling you out on this
Yeah.
podcast.
You're the example earlier that isn't being critical enough.
Yes, then you definitely need a coach.
Yeah. Well, I think we've really painted a picture on the importance of doing a mid-year check-in, the why behind it, and a little bit of the reflection. But we believe it's important to have a model that you follow, and not just in reflection, but that circles back to reflection and all the other pieces of the broader puzzle. And we wanted to share, right, Nikki, with you guys today, what we think that model is, and the model we follow at the one thing, and how this piece of reflection and mid-year check-in kind of fits into that overall model.
Yeah, this isn't you'll notice a trend in everything that we do, that it's not all that different from the model for doing the beginning of the year goals, right? It's not going to drastically change. And yet here the comparative analysis is what's so important. Right? This is where you have to ask yourself, okay, what did I intend to do? And then have the honest conversation about what am I doing? And then the next most natural question, which is what needs to change in order for me, if this goal still remains the same, right? And this really is the same process that we take you through at the beginning of the year, right? Because at the beginning of the year, you're really assessing life in general, or maybe what did I do last year and what needs to change. This is just in a smaller time frame. So I think it would be helpful, Chris, to just remind everybody what that actual process is.
Yeah, of course. So the think flywheel, if you can imagine this, it's circular, so it indicates that this is a process over time, a journey, something that it isn't just to set it and forget it, that there's a circular cyclical nature to this system, this model. And it starts with casting a vision, and we'll dig into each one of these as we go through. So casting a vision from which you can identify priorities, the things that matter most, in alignment with that vision, such that you can next create a plan to achieve that vision through those priorities. From that plan that you've created, now you can take action. You can get to work. You can do the things. And after you've taken action in intervals of time, shorter is better than longer, you're evaluating results, right? So cast the vision, identify priorities, create a plan, take action, and evaluate results. And you're doing this, and like I said, it's a cyclical process, so that you're constantly revisiting and going through. And this mid-year check-in is a perfect example of where now you're, hey, let's evaluate results. And a good point to then connect back to what is your future picture of success.
And by the way, if you've been a longtime follower of ours and you've gone to our trainings and you've listened to the podcast, you're just going to recognize these as the 3 Ps. This is an easier, digestible way of thinking about the 3 Ps. Purpose is your vision. What am I trying to do and why am I trying to do it? Priority is, okay, based off that, what matters most? And then productivity is, what am I going to do about it? Right? How do I need to show up on a day-to-day basis in order to achieve those things? That's all.
Yeah, exactly. It's a model to implement this philosophy that you just mentioned that we call the 3 Ps.
So, Chris, if I'm sitting here at the mid-year and I'm like, well, okay, cool, cast a vision. I already did that. I already did that at the beginning of the year. So, how would you recommend that people change this or reevaluate this? Do we start with assessing what our vision was at the beginning of the year? Do we ask ourselves a new question? What's your best practice here?
Yeah, I love that. So if you've never done vision work, or it's something maybe you did, but you're trying to do it in the context that we teach it at the one thing, you really are casting a new vision, and that is an important first step. And sometimes people don't recognize the value of that and how important it is to do that work and do it meaningfully, because it really does set you up. Very often we find people want to jump into set goals in the shorter term, start to take action, just get some results, and they'll later discover and end up coming back to doing the vision work anyway. So you do want to start there. If you already have cast a vision at the beginning of the year, Nikki, back to your question, then after you've evaluated where you are and you've done some powerful reflection, we talked about this. It means picking your head up and validating that you're either on track to that vision or that maybe you need to course correct and make some changes to what that is based on what you've learned. So I think it's recast or validate at this point in the year.
Yeah, I don't think there's a right answer here, right?
Mhm.
And so I love your example on both sides because we get asked this question all the time. We do a live training of this class, and we almost every single time get the question of, okay, well, am I doing a new one or do I need to go back and assess my old one? And we'll say, yes, the answer is yes. You could do either of those things. Neither one of those is the wrong answer. If you feel like you looked back at the one that you built for the beginning of this year and that still feels right, then great. Then you're just going to assess where you are in comparison with where you should be 6 months through the year and then make any plan adjustments that you need to make. If it feels like it's totally off track based off what's happening in life right now or based off what you've learned or based off your heart or whatever it might be, or you feel like you're way out of balance in all the other 7 circles, well, then that means that you might need to cast a new vision for the next 6 months. There's no right answer here.
Yeah, I would say when you find yourself asking those questions, then just understand the core purpose of why you want to have a vision in the first place, and that would help you. It's a compass. You're calibrating your compass so that you've got long line of sight to where you generally want to be in the future, as specific as you can be, or that's appropriate. And so, if you understand that, and you're trying to decide whether or not your goals for this year are really serving you, like what do you have to do that relative to something, right? You need to say, okay, well, how do I know if these goals are on track for a bigger picture? You have to have clarity on what that vision is in the future. Where do you want to be someday in the future? What is that picture of success? And if you understand the purpose of doing that work, then whether or not you have to cast a new vision or you're validating your existing one, just it's whether or not you feel like you've got that compass calibrated and you're clear on where you want to go.
Where I think this is so helpful, especially in the context of a mid-year check-in too, Chris, is that I know we both have coached many organizations and many people individually who have a lot of trouble setting one-year goals for whatever reason, who really have a lot of trouble setting someday goals, but especially
Hmm.
might have some trouble setting short-term goals and setting a short-term vision because we often hear, and any one of the beliefs that come up, which by the way, all could be true. Like we just don't know what life's going to look like in a year, or we don't know what business or the economy is going to look like in a year, and our business is heavily dependent upon that, or we don't know what the market's going to look like, or I don't know what I'm going to look like or want, or I just don't feel comfortable projecting that far into the future. And where I think the mid-year check-in is so important is that will sometimes help people to make that vision a little bit smaller and less intimidating for them, and just say, okay, then don't worry about a year from now, don't worry about someday, don't worry about 5 years or 10 years from now. Where do you want to be in 6 months? A lot of
Mm.
people are far more open to digesting 6 months at a time than they are committing to some big future vision. And I think the more you get practiced at setting these sort of mini visions, so to speak, these shorter time periods, the easier it's going to get for you to cast that bigger vision in your life too. Do you see that come up for people that you're coaching too?
Yeah, you went exactly where I was going to go next too, which is it really is like a muscle you build over time. And if you're struggling to dial that picture in, just go to 6 months, like Nikki said. That's fine. And then as you get stronger with this process, your ability to see further over the horizon will grow, and then you'll get better and better and better to the point where it starts to become really automatic. I see this all the time. In fact, I just had a conversation yesterday with one of the couples that I coach, and they were just recognizing, they were looking at their 411 and their goals from our goal setting retreat from years past, and they were just acknowledging how different the goals that they write are, and how much bigger and more meaningful they are, and how much more connected they are. And we're really blown away about how much they've improved in this. So that's just validating what you'd said, which is you will get better at anything that you focus on, and this process is one of those for sure.
Totally. And a lot of it has to be proven to people over time too, right? That you cast the vision and then 6 months from now you look up and you're like, oh my gosh, I actually did it. Like I really did that thing. It's the same equivalent we use Fitness is always an easy example to use because it's very quantifiable, but it's the person who goes from couch to 5K and then decides, well, maybe if I can do a 5K, I could do a 10K. Maybe if I can do a 10K, I could do a half marathon. Maybe if I can do that, I could do a whole marathon. And before they
Mhm.
know it, their entire identity has shifted and they've become a runner, right? Whereas before they would have never thought of themselves as that. This is something that evolves over time as you prove to yourself that you're able to do it.
Yeah, it's just it never ceases to amaze me how much growth someone can have in a year. It's just shocking. If you focus on something and this happens frequently too, where you'll set a goal because it feels just huge for you for the year, and you end up knocking it out in a quarter or 6 months, and now you're in a place where it's like, wow, that's now that we're at the mid-year check-in, let's remember we want to have a goal, so let's reset and get a goal now that's going above and beyond.
This is also an opportunity for the people who do achieve a little bit faster. We've talked a lot today about being off track, right? Which is where this is very useful, but it's also really useful for those people who crushed it. Like some people do set really small goals for themselves or smaller than maybe they were able to achieve. And they're 6 months in and they've surpassed everything they outlined for themselves. And we see this all the time. And what can often happen for the latter half of the year is they get almost a little bit lost, right? Like I
Mm,
don't really know what to do now because all I set out was to do this and I didn't really think past that. So this is an
mm,
opportunity to solve for that too.
yeah. Well, we talked about vision. So cast a vision, get clarity on where you want to be as far out as you can reasonably think, and it feels, I guess, impactful for you. But greater distances are better here if you can, because of what that does for you. But the next step in this is to identify priorities. So now you have a general picture, hopefully, of where you want to be, so you can start to pluck out and figure out what are the things they need to focus on to move that direction.
For sure. So if I were in this position and I was doing this for myself or for a business, which I just did, so I can give some real examples here. I what I look at is okay, what did I set out for the beginning of the year? And I'm going to start exactly where we started, which is vision. Is that still what I want to do? Are those still the goals? Okay, if those are still the goals, am I to the halfway point? And I'll tell you, this year we definitely were not. We were not. I can tell you right now today, when I looked at this in at one of the businesses, we were not at the halfway point. And so then I asked myself, okay, if I still want to achieve what I set out at the beginning of the year, what's going to need to change? In other words, how do I need to redefine my priorities if I'm going to catch up between now and the end of the year? And often, what I would offer for everyone, a really important question to be asking yourself is why didn't I achieve it in the first place? Like what actually took me off track? Was there one specific thing that took my attention or my time away? Is there one specific thing that took me off priority if the priority remains the same?
Mm. That's a great, I think, piece of reflection in and of itself is to figure out where that was working. It's when you have a vision and you say you have this bigger goal, like relative to one area, let's say it's your business, then you're trying to. And what I understand is you're trying to figure out, okay, what are the big priorities that I'm going to need to accomplish to achieve that vision, and how can you get specific about what those are, and really break them out into different areas so that you can next build a plan against it.
For sure. And I think again, people tend to overcomplicate this. And what we're saying is that sometimes the plan can be exactly the same. We just assess what actually took us off track in the first place, or do I need to potentially turn the volume up on some of my priorities and some of my actions? Or
Mm.
maybe did I not give a clear enough plan at the beginning of the year? And I'll give an example I see often in one of my worlds, which is the world of real estate. I'll have agents who come up to me and say, well, I'm going to double my business next year. And I'll say, that's amazing. How are you going to do that? And they're like, I got the exact same plan as I had last year, but this year I'm going to double it. I'm like, well, that's not how that works. You can't just hope that it's going to double and it doubles. Something has to change. You either have to do more activity, you have to talk to more people, you've got to bring in more leads, you've got to spend more money, any version of any of those or all of those, depending upon how much you want to grow, right? So we can't just cross our fingers and say, I'd like to double. Something has to change in the activity. So this is an opportunity to look back and say, our priorities, your priorities may not change. You very well may look up and say, I have the exact same job to do, the exact same activity to do to get to this goal. Do I need to turn the volume up on it? Or did I perhaps not assign enough of it at the beginning of the year in order to get to this bigger goal that I had?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And also, I think it's important to acknowledge that not all the things that you could do are going to matter equally and on this path. And you're trying to separate out the ones and say, okay, well, to your point, which one of these, if we turn the volume up on, is going to have the greatest impact for us?
For sure. And then from there, we're going to actually create a plan around it. So I always ask, like, what actually needs to change? And here's the version that Chris and I hear every time we coach someone on this. Someone's like, oh, I just got to do it. Like, I just got a time block. I just got to do the thing. To which we'll both say, we know, and you know, and everybody knows that we have to do the thing. But what's actually going to change in order to ensure that that thing gets done? What was getting in the way before? What needs to change in your behavior or in your schedule or in your activity to actually ensure that for the next 6 months, that is the number one thing that gets done?
Yeah, and that's a great point because you'll see sometimes that the conversation will almost like erode to like, oh, I'll just put it on my calendar, and you lose the opportunity to dig into, as you just said, like what really has to be done differently for you to be successful. Because it's easy just to say, okay, yeah, so I think I need 2 hours to do that. I'll put it on my calendar, but there's so much more to dig into in how you execute this plan to be successful.
Well, the example we always give too, when someone says, oh, I just need to put on my calendar, we'll ask, well, was it not on your calendar for the first 6 months? To which they always are like, well, yeah, it was. I'm like, great. So it's actually not about putting it on your calendar. What it might be is more support in protecting the time block. What it might actually be is getting it done earlier in the day so it actually gets done. What it might actually
Hmm.
be is handing off these things that don't matter as much so that you can focus on this priority because we're still clear that this is the priority, right? So this is an opportunity for you to have that honest conversation with yourself as well.
Yeah, right. That's an important conversation to have. So we're saying you have clarity on your priorities. You should create a plan now. How are you going to go achieve the things that you set out to achieve? If you guys haven't listened to, we have a couple of episodes about our planning tools, the GPS and the 411. Nikki and I recorded those so you guys could have a chance to dig into when we talk about these. If you want to learn more, you can do that. So those go check those out if you want to understand more about those tools. But we use the GPS, which stands for Goal, Priorities, and Strategies. It's a one-page business plan that lets you say, okay, here's my goal. What are my priorities? And what are the strategies that we're going to implement to execute and achieve those priorities, ultimately the goal? And it's a great way to align a team, to get a goal out of your mind onto paper in a simple format. And the other tool is the 411, which is like a goal work back schedule that lets you take the priorities and strategies from the GPS. And even if you don't have a GPS, you can put annual, monthly, and weekly goals on this 411 to break them down. So these tools are meant to serve this piece of our system, which is to create a plan.
And by the way, don't be afraid to just make one for the next 6 months. I think often when people in our ecosystem get really familiarized with our goal setting process and with our tools, they can sometimes it can almost sometimes be a detriment in the sense that they get stuck in the way that
Mm,
those tools were originally designed to be built. The GPS was originally designed to be usually for a year, right? It's usually a 1 year's one page business plan. And yet we can share that inside the one thing we've had many times where it's we have a quarter bit 135. This GPS is for just for this quarter. That's all that we're focused on. And we're just going to execute this GPS for this quarter. You could have a GPS that's specifically just for the next 6 months. You might need to realign. I know we do our best effort to build the right 411 at the beginning. And yet you might find yourself 6 months in realizing that the actual actions need to change. You might need to redo the entire 411. That's okay. That's what this mid-year check-in is for.
that's right. It's so important that you have your plan on paper in a place that you can see it, that you're accountable to, and if you have a team that they all have some visibility on it and there's alignment. So I think that's really important that you may have a plan in your mind, but getting it on paper and in a place where you can be accountable to it is really important.
For sure. I also think that you said something that I want to come back to because it's really important, and I don't think that we do this enough with our teams. For those that lead teams, for those that run businesses, for a lot of the organizations that we coach and serve through the one thing, the one of the big challenges that we see is that they, just like we talked about at the beginning, they set the goals for the beginning of the year, and they don't look at them consistently as a team. And above all, very rarely do we see them do a mid-year review like this.
Hmm.
And it's so important to do this not only for yourself, of course, but also for your organization if you run one, or your team if you have one. And then also have them participate in it and ask yourselves, what do we need to change, and get everyone's buy-in on that through the next 6 months as well.
Great point. Yeah, it's not a set it and forget it. It's something that it's a living document that you need to have regular check-ins just to stay on track. And then mid-year, what do we need to change, adjust, update so that this is relevant and it's going to get us where we want to go.
For sure. And it's about helping them to understand how they can change their behavior and their action through the end of the year. This gives them DNA on what needs to look different, how they might need to show up differently, and also gives them better DNA on the outcome too. Because when we're not assessing it and we're not addressing it on a regular basis, which even if you're going through your GPS in 411, we're still not looking at all the goals and how all these parts come together, which is what we see so often in these organizations. This gives you an opportunity to do another version of that halfway through the year to make sure that you do actually end the year on track.
Something you said there, I think I want to like drill into a little bit more, which you said come together. And I think that's such a great point. The team come together, because think what happens, at least in many cases, is if you create a plan, you're having like an alignment event. And then that's happening, let's say at the beginning of the year, the team comes together, or you do this on your own for your own personal goal, or you're a solopreneur and it's just for you and your business that you run yourself. And then just naturally over time, things start to move away from the center, right? Like just people are starting to work over here, small misalignments happen. And what you're trying to do here at this reset is bring everybody back together. And I
Yeah.
wouldn't discount the importance of having that kind of repetition around realignment.
Yeah. And just having an open conversation about whether you're on track, off track, and what needs to change altogether.
Hmm.
Because especially as the organization gets bigger, you may have silos that are way ahead and perfectly on track, and you may have silos that are way behind. And you may need to change resources and move people around and reassess and turn up the volume on certain teams and down the volume on others. This is all part of how all of these separate parts become part of the bigger whole, and how the organization achieves together.
Yeah, and I can guarantee that there's either you by yourself and or members on a team are working on things that don't matter as much as you thought they might have. And
For sure.
assuming that resource could be best allocated elsewhere, you want to do that.
For sure. So let's go back, Chris, and talk about if I'm somebody who's listening to this, and we strategically made sure this was going to come out right at the mid year, and I'm listening to this and I'm inspired. I want to go back and do my mid year review. Let's remind everyone what that process could look like.
Sure. So the you want to start with some reflection, of course. You figure out where you are, locate yourself. We would in our system we would call this the evaluate results phase of our flywheel. So you're trying to say, "Hey, where am I relative to where I want to be, and what needs to change to get back on track, to continue to play with the lead? Do I need to make changes to my goals?" To do that, we can pick up our heads and look at a broader perspective of where we want to go, which is our vision. And this connects to the next piece. It's just cast a vision, validate your vision, revisit your vision, make sure you're on the right track for where you want to be in the future. Nikki talked about this earlier. That vision is relative to what you feel comfortable, and the skill that you have in doing this process could be 6 months, could be 10 years, could be someday, which is intentionally not time bound because you just know what you want to accomplish. So there's levels there. So then you want to just revisit this vision conversation. If you haven't done that work, couldn't recommend it enough. It's really important for the process. From there, we're saying, okay, I have good clarity on where I want to go. What are the priorities I need to separate out? The 20% things are going to deliver 80% of my results over time so that I'm on track to hit this vision. That priority work will then set you up to create a plan. Now, we have tools, GPS, 411. We talk about them all the time. Those are things that we recommend. But regardless, like create this plan, this alignment, this path that you believe has the sufficiency to get you to these priorities that you've identified and ultimately your vision. So that's create a plan. Then go take action. Go implement the strategies that you've identified. Go do the work. And in doing that, effective time blocking, honor your time blocks, like do the things, be productive. The purpose, priority. Now we're back to the 3 Ps, the productivity piece. This is where you should begin to see results. the output of the work that you're doing, which is the last piece, then you're back to where we started, which is evaluate the results. Like, how is this going? Is the plan that you identify, the actions that you're taking, working? And then we're back to validate your vision, revisit your vision, and start from the top.
And what I would remind everyone of and encourage everyone of, and thank you for that, by the way, Chris. And what I would encourage everyone to go back to is that whatever this looks like for you is the right answer. So if you do your 6 month review and you throw away all the goals that you had at the beginning of the year and you are building an entirely new plan, awesome. If you look up and say, I'm perfectly on track, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, awesome. And if you look up and say, hey, I still want what I said I wanted at the beginning of the year, and yet I'm off track and I'm going to change X, Y, and Z behavior and actions in order to get there, awesome. All of those are the right answer. There isn't a right or wrong way to come up with the plan for the next 6 months, but this does give you another opportunity to say, am I actually moving toward the life that I want, towards the goals that I have, towards the vision that I want to create? And then gives you an opportunity to change course if the answer is no. Right? That's what we use this 6 month review for. So we hope this was helpful. We're going to be doing a live training on this very soon too. So watch out for that from us. Anything else you would share, Chris, that you would want to give anyone advice on how to do the mid-year review?
Yeah, I can pretend like I'm a guest, and the one thing that I want you guys to take away from the conversation today really is that you don't need to overcomplicate this. And Nikki, this sounds like it's what you're also saying. Is it's like simplicity is key. Like, just keep in mind what you're trying to do is just get clarity and take action, and then know what you want and go try to do the thing. And don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. You can add complexity if it's necessary, but I would go for simple is the best way.
Yeah, for sure. I'm still trying to convince Gary and Jay for their tagline to be just do the thing. Probably a little too close to Nike, but that's really all it's about, right? Just do the thing. Identify the most important thing and then do the thing. That's as simple as it gets, y'all. We hope this was helpful. We hope this was valuable. As always, please share with us. We love when you send us messages to the podcast at theonething.com, or when you share, when you're listening, share what you've learned, share what you are using. Tag us on Instagram at the One Thing Book. We love hearing from you, and we do these podcast episodes for you to give you these resources to help you. So if there's more you want to hear, if there's more you want us to talk about, these are all built based off what you all ask for. So thanks for listening. We hope this was helpful, and we'll see everybody next time.
Bye, everybody.